Today's project is going to be a Elite Engineering E2-X catch can install on a 2018 Camaro ZL1. So just to kind of give you an idea what's going on, I've taken the elbow off from the stock airbox to the throttle body already, and then we're going to go from there. All right, here's all the pieces and parts that come with the Elite Engineering E2-X Stage 2 catch can. So you got your brackets on the right, the catch can in the middle, plumbing I should say, hardware on the left, replacement PCV valve bracket, and then the little mounting screw that holds the bracket in place. So just to give you an idea, pretty substantial, good size catch can. Clearly it's well made. Gonna have some fun later with working the hoses into those fittings, I'm sure. And then there's the release at the bottom, or the drain at the bottom. So all in all, very quality made pieces and parts. Gonna be interesting to see how easily it goes together. Well, the great thing about video is you get a chance to go back and add things you forgot and edit them in. So what I forgot to cover in my original shoot of this video was the removal of the supercharger lid. You have to remove the lid in order to get to the bolts that hold the supercharger onto the block itself. There are 20 bolts that hold this supercharger lid on. They're all 10 millimeter. Starting off in the front here, you've got 3 in the front. These all have wire bundle holders on them. You just pull these straight off and it exposes a stem end on the bolt itself. So you'll need a deep well socket to do that. Then you've got 4 down the right hand side, 5 along the back. You've got that one in the corner. That's a wire that tube hold down, that'll pull straight up and off. Those 2 tie downs will pull straight up and off. And then the 5th one back in the corner. Then you're gonna have 4 along the right, 4 along the left hand side, and then 4 in the middle. And those are all 10 millimeter. They come out really easily. Don't take a whole lot of effort to get them off. Some other points of advice if you're gonna do this. I would go ahead, I did this, pull this vacuum line off of here. There's a quick disconnect right there. Push down, pull off. Same thing up here, where that line comes back around, connects down to this point here. Push in there, pull off, and you can pull that tube off and lay off to the side. These 2 lines here, these 2 hoses here, I did pull this one off. This one actually connects to the elbow from the stock airbox to the throttle body. I pulled that off just to get it out of the way. And I also, again, pulled this off and just laid it over here to the side. And that way you can kind of get it out of the way, get it out of your way as you're working up here in the front, especially when you're working up underneath the supercharger. Another word of advice, and this is probably the most important part, mount your can first. If you're going to do this install, mount the can and then run your lines, your tubing, your hoses from the point where they either splice into the PCV valve or the vacuum lines or in the elbow. And don't worry, I'll cover this in a minute, what this line is down here on the bottom, what this does. But run them from the point of attachment back to the can. It's much easier if you do it that way. If you try to run them from the can to the point of attachment, wherever they go in, it's a little harder to get it right, and you're losing some tubing in the process. So run everything from where it mates to the motor to the can versus from the can to the motor. Just got the supercharger lid off the top of the supercharger here. You can kind of see some of the puddling of oil. Not too bad. The car only has just over 2,000 miles on it. The supercharger lid off, I already showed you the puddling. Clean the puddling up off the top of the supercharger. And next we're going to, after that, got my breaker bar on here on the tensioner, which is right down here. Push that way on the breaker bar to release the tension, and just slide the belt off the supercharger pulley and lay it down here in the bottom. Once we did that, got the bolts that hold the supercharger down to the engine loosened. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left side, 1 in the back corner, 1 in the back corner there, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side. Once those are loosened, you will be able to budge the supercharger. Okay, so we got all the bolts holding the supercharger onto the block loosened. I didn't pull them out, didn't need to. And what we've got right now is, was able to crack the top of the supercharger, stand it up, hold it up a little bit. Got a piece of wood here. There's a bracket down here. I don't know if you can see this or not. There's a bracket down here. Let me get a light. Okay, so I got my trusty light here. So I got a bracket right here. I got just a piece of wood up underneath there, resting on top, or holding the supercharger up on this side, and then just a crushed roll of tape on this side to kind of keep it from teetering over on one side. Now, what we're after now is that black plug that you can see right down here in the bottom, underneath the throttle body. And we're going to back that out here in a few minutes using a 14mm socket. But that's what you want to pull, is that right there. Okay, so using an angle grinder, the nipple that comes on the Elite Engineering PCV valve is a little long because it ends up butting in. This ends up hitting the top of the water pump. So had to grind it down using an angle grinder to about the first barb here, and then about a 45-degree angle so that you essentially get a straight line between the threads along the edge of the nipple. So we're going to try to see if we can't get this to fit in there now. Okay, after a little bit of wrenching, we finally got that thing in there. It's not an easy fit for sure. Had to use a combination of some channel lock pliers, some small channel locks, and a 14mm to kind of spin it around so it gets the face in the direction we're in. But right now it's in as tight as is torqued as hard as the original PCV valve. So that's probably the hardest part. Okay, after some serious play here, the key and critical part of this is getting the nipple angled at just such a direction that the supercharger, the snout of the supercharger, doesn't impact the hose that comes off that fitting. It's resting. You can kind of see here where it's kind of resting on a little bit. It's not going to really affect the tube at all, so I don't think we're got any issues there. Good news is we got the supercharger sit back down on top of the block where it needs to be, and then the hose is coming off like it needs to come off. Okay, it's got the supercharger lid back on. The bolts for the supercharger, 86 inch-pounds. The lid also 86 inch-pounds. Comes out to about 9 Newton meters. A lot of people say good and tight with a 1/4 inch ratchet. Yeah, it works great, but everything went back together just the way it was supposed to. No issues there whatsoever. Still got the hose coming out of here at the bottom. Put the belt back on. You can see there's no impact whatsoever. And then routing that hose that you can see here, coming off the new PCV valve, coming around underneath this wiring harness, back side of the engine, and then coming into the back of the catch can. The trick on the catch can, the rubber, the hoses for those things, sorry my hand's shaking like crazy, but the trick for those catch can, those lines, is stick the rubber end into a hot glass of water for about 30 seconds. As hot as you can get it out of the tap. Stick it in there for about 30 seconds, put it into the ferrule end, and then reattach it to the catch can. You'll need an 18 on the back side, and on the front side, I think it's a 20. I'm not sure. I had to use a crescent wrench because I don't have a 20 millimeter wrench for those ferrule ends. So about a 19 or 20 here, and then a 14, or a correction, was it 18? Mm-hmm. It was an 18 here. Don't worry, when you tighten these things up, these lines are going to twist, but it's okay because they will untwist because of the way that the setup is in the catch can. So don't worry about that. And then what's next is I'll do a wire tie to keep this going where I want it. As far as the bracket, so that's how I mounted the bracket. Truth be told, I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but the can sits right down here. There's no contact with anything. It doesn't really move at all. I was kind of halfway concerned about it rubbing up against this hose clamp, if you will, here, but I don't really think it's an issue. Okay, so we got 2 of the lines routed. We've got the intake line routed through, as we already showed you before. And then this other line that comes off the front here, comes around, routed it through here, and with the T connector lines up with this vacuum line that comes from the, I believe it's off the bottom of the air box. At any rate, so a good way to do this is to pull this off, and there's another quick disconnect on the bottom where it connects. Pull that out and to work on it outside the car. If you try to work on it inside the car, it's a real pain in the butt. So go ahead and pull that line out. You're going to cut it, stick the T in there. A little bit of oil just on your end of your finger around the threads to go in here, and this does not require any kind of clamp. These things are extremely tight, and besides, the clamp is too big. It won't bite on this anyway. And this is kind of a hard plastic. It's not rubber. Okay, routing for the third hose, coming back into the ducting from the airbox, the stock airbox, into the throttle body. Initially thought I had the idea of trying to thread the elbow connector into the side of the intake stock airbox. Decided against that because possibility of maybe fouling the MAF sensor. So went inboard of that, inboard of the MAF sensor, and on the bottom of the rubber ducting for the air, drilled a 3/8 inch hole and then inserted the elbow into there, and that should give us the connection that we need. Now, routing of the hose is going to be underneath here and then around and through back to the can, as opposed to where the second line comes down and around into. The primary reason for that is I want to avoid the belts, any issue possible with coming into contact with the belt. So more to follow on that. I'm going to have to get some more hose. Okay, so installation is complete. So I've got the E2-X catch can installed back here off of this structural support that goes between the firewall and the left front dampener. Mounts in there pretty tight. Input line, again, comes off of the new PCV valve installed underneath the supercharger. Comes around the side, back side of the motor, zip tied there, into the import or intake side of the catch can. Number 2X exhaust comes off towards the vacuum line that comes from the brake booster, I believe. And you can see the arrow installed away from the catch can, flowing towards the engine. Tees into the brake boost line that feeds into the side of the throttle body. And a number 3 line comes off. I routed it underneath the airbox. The one-way check valve is under here. You can also see that it's got the arrow pointing away from the catch can. And then to the bottom side of the rubber boot, or the elbow, between the airbox, stock airbox, and the throttle body. Again, pretty clean install. Took a little longer than I thought it was going to take, but nonetheless, it's in there. It looks pretty tight. So another project completed.